Hand things over to a couple of our faculty, Matt Nicoletti and Baron Tiram. If you all want to come up and kind of kick off our lecture series and give a preview of what's to come, and then we'll roll into the introductions of our speaker, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so I'm going to hand things off to you all. I get to sit down now, which is great.
All right, now for our main event. Hi, I'm Matt.
Hi, I'm Baron.
And we're co-chairs of the lecture series. And as you know, the convocation is a time where we kick off the semester of lectures. As you can see, we have a lot of fantastic lectures this semester on main campus, but also in Charleston. And we would encourage all of you to visit on campus in person, and also check out the Charleston lectures on Zoom. They're very good. Since 2023, we have combined the student-led journal with the lecture series, and it's been highly successful. So with that in mind, I would like to invite the co-editors of this year's journal, Matthew Fernandez and Lucas Sparsda, to introduce this year's theme, Patchwork, and they'll be followed by Lavender Testimer, who will introduce this year's guest lecturer. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, hi, I'm Luke.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And we, like it was said, we are the co-editors of Enter for this upcoming issue, Patchwork. So before we get into what the theme is really about, we want to just give a general synopsis of what Enter is. And so for those of you who don't know, Enter is a student-run publication that was conceived to provide a platform to students for exploration and exchange of ideas. The name Enter comes from the prefix meaning between and among. It reflects the desire to build upon the interdisciplinary pedagogy within the school and invites students to address the increasingly intersectional society issues that face contemporary design and practice. And so the journal formalizes the school's body of work with two central goals, the first being to support students interested in critical exploration, and the second, to frame and promote the innovative projects created by Clemson students.
So the journal invites all students from the School of Architecture, but we're also opening up to the entire college to submit works that are exploring and addressing this idea of patchwork in art and architecture. So what do we mean when we say patchwork in architecture? We're talking about exploring how architecture stitches together diverse identities, histories, and spatial practices. This theme considers the layering, adaptation, and reassembly of space through cultural exchange, informal interventions, and acts of reclamation. It highlights how built environments evolve in response to social and political forces, shaping and reflecting the identities of those who inhabit them, from repurposed spaces to overlapping histories. Patchwork reveals architecture as an ongoing process of negotiation and resilience and transformation. So in essence, it's talking about how architecture isn't this one-sided project that we're working on. There's all these vast, rich dialogue of people and stakeholders who are involved in the projects we do, and we're trying to showcase all of those different aspects. And then finally, in the spring, we'll be asking for all student submissions that you feel align with this theme to email us at that email at the top. And then there's the Instagram if you want to follow along with any updates and events that'll be happening. That's it. Cool. Thank you.
Hi again, I'm Lavender Testimer. I'm on the lecture series committee, and I'll be introducing tonight's lecture. So first, we'd like to thank the Richard O'Kane family for supporting our lecture series and providing us the opportunity to have these amazing invited lectures. For today's Richard O'Kane lecture, I will be introducing Katie Swenson, who is here representing Mass Design Group. Founded in 2008, Mass Design Group is a nonprofit organization with work that spans both design and research, and its primary agenda is to demonstrate a model of architecture serving society. Following this year's theme of patchwork, Mass Design Group's projects span a wide variety of geographic locations. The group's approach to design is both holistic and individual, while composed of many interdisciplinary perspectives. Joining us from Mass Design Group is Katie Swenson. Katie is a nationally recognized design leader, writer, educator, and advocate at the intersection of architecture and social justice. A senior principal at Mass Design Group, she advances global initiatives rooted in equity, sustainability, and cultural memory. With over 2 decades of experience, she brings a unique blend of practice, scholarship, and public leadership to the built environment. Prior to Mass, Katie served as Vice President of Design and Sustainability at Enterprise Community Partners, where she expanded the Rose Fellowship and co-founded the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute. She is the author of Design with Love and In Bohemia, and she teaches at Parsons School of Design and the Columbia Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. A 2019 Loeb Fellow at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, Katie holds a Master of Architecture from the University of Virginia and a Bachelor of Arts in Comparative Literature from UC Berkeley. Her work centers on architecture as a force for dignity, memory, and the public good. We look forward to hearing about her work, and please welcome Katie Swenson.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, you're gonna scoot me over to my presentation. Let's see what's gonna happen. We'll get the technology going. Will one of you guys do this for me? It's on, okay. All right, let's see. So first day of school, first week. How many new students are in the room? Brand new, first year here at Clemson. Oh my gosh, do you feel like you're in the right place? I feel like it. I made a donation to the Clemson Architecture Foundation while I was sitting in my chair. I don't know. For me, I traveled as an undergrad. I traveled as a grad student. It started a traveling life. Also, all these organizations, thank you so much for sharing, each of you. Someone's going to get my screen on for me, I know. So I'm just going to riff until then. All these organizations are so good. I love the patchwork theme. When I was a graduate student, I was on the editorial board. And I got to work with Samuel Mockbee from the Rural Studio. He was on our cover and wrote an article for us. And I was a first-year graduate student, and he changed my life. Like, what can I say? He came to our school, he wrote, he taught, he was around, he showed like a new way of being an architect, and he totally changed my life. So get involved in all these things, it's really important. Okay, I'm gonna keep going, and we'll see how this all works out. So I'm so glad to be here. I'm coming from New York City. I teach with David Lewis, so come back for his lecture at Parsons, and we work with the Healthy Building Materials Lab. I think being here for convocation is absolutely so fun. Last year I got to attend my niece's white coat ceremony. And they do it at the beginning. And I got to go as an aunt. I got to go to her white coat ceremony, and it was just fascinating how they take sort of their oath at the beginning of medical school. And so some of my questions that I want to pose for you today, in architecture, we don't necessarily take that same kind of oath. You know, we don't stand up and sort of pledge to serve, you know, who, what, where, when. So today, I think at convocation, what I hope that we'll do is really reflect on how to get the year started off. You know, what's the purpose? What's your purpose? How do you enter into this field as an authentic voice and contributor? And architecture, of course, is a team sport. So we're going to talk about that too. How to bring your full self to participate in this larger project. Okay, so MASS. Did you all know what MASS stood for? We're from Boston, so you might have thought it was Massachusetts. But MASS actually stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society. So I'm going to share with you today a bit about what our project is. All right, so let's go. Yes, so I absolutely loved, as I said, this whole idea about patchwork, and I've tried to kind of knit that idea into my presentation today. So I tried to call this Stitching the Story, Architecture Justice, and the Fabric of Belonging. I thought the prompt, this idea of exploring how architecture stitches together diverse identities, histories, and spatial practices, was central to our work at MASS, and certainly central to the work of architecture. I think patchwork, though, is not just a metaphor for your time here at school. It's really a metaphor for design as a whole and a kind of practice around justice as a whole. And I think if you let it, you can let it be really a metaphor to govern some of your choices in life. So today I want to start with a story, of course. We're going to stitch this story. And this story starts in a kind of unusual place in the far reaches of Brooklyn with what I would call a standing ovation. So let's see if I can get this going. Uh-oh, let's see, how am I going to do this? Uh-oh, guys. Can you help me? We knew this was going to be a problem. Okay.
Wow. Its woven facade glows with the stories of the community, honoring the past while inviting a future of dialogue and growth. The building is more than just a library. It is a palaver for the community, a space where truth-telling, reconciliation, and celebration converge. Here, history and hope intertwine, guiding East New York toward a future grounded in justice, reflection, and the collective spirit of the people.
Woo. Right on.
So what you just saw was something I would say that's incredibly rare. That was my colleague, Demario Walker-Brown, presenting the concept design for a new library in East New York, one of the most underinvested neighborhoods in the city. This was in December 2024. An architect receiving a standing ovation at a community meeting. That moment was shocking to most of us and had a kind of electrical current. This room full of people, some of whom you saw, some of whom were off screen, elders, teenagers, staff, artists, neighbors, collaborators, stood together in this kind of wave of applause. People had tears in their eyes. And I remember sitting there thinking, my heart was pounding, this is what it means to stitch a story together. This is what it looks like when your design builds community. At the time, I couldn't quite explain why it moved me so deeply, but I want to try today with you because I don't think this is just a story about architecture. It's really a story about purpose. In the spring of 2010, I was sitting on the floor of a packed lecture room at Howard University. The room sort of buzzed with energy. Architects, planners, activists from all over the world had come together for a gathering called Structures for Inclusion. Much like you today, I was surrounded by people who believed that design could be something more than aesthetics, more than status, more than profit. We were there to explore a radical idea that architecture could serve the public good first and foremost, that buildings could become systems of care, that communities could become authors of their own futures. Over that decade, I would work with emerging architects and community groups across the country, making the case for the importance of home, and also learning how design and designers could be an enduring partner with communities. Many of those stories are told in my book, Design with Love, At Home in America. At that point, I'd already spent over a decade working in community architecture, focused on equitable housing, affordable development, and designing with, not just for, people. But I was still searching for something. And on that day, I found it. A young team from Mass, Model of Architecture Serving Society, were there presenting their work in Rwanda, while the Butaro District Hospital was at that point still under construction. For the first time, I saw a kind of community architecture I'd been dreaming of, a hospital designed not just to treat illness, but to promote dignity. Here in East Africa, in a small country called Rwanda, devastated only 20 years earlier by the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, two visionary leaders came together with a bold goal. Dr. Paul Farmer, the late founder of Partners in Health, was a public health pioneer determined to bring world-class care to the world's poorest communities. Dr. Agnes Binigwahu, a pediatrician who had returned to Rwanda in 1996 and then served as Minister of Health. These two were equally committed to reshaping their country's health outcomes. Their collaboration began with a conversation in New York City at the back of a hall in 2001. At a meeting of global leaders who were pontificating about health outcomes, they shared this sort of sense of a moral outrage that people were still dying of easily treatable conditions, and that poverty itself had become a precursor to inequity and injustice. Together, they set out to prove that access to dignified, high-quality health care should not be a privilege of wealth, but a basic human right. Here in the Bwera district in the north of Rwanda, one of the most impoverished regions at the time, there were 400,000 people without access to medical care. And yet, this setting is breathtaking. Rwanda is often called land of 1,000 hills. I like to tell people it's a bit like New Zealand meets Tuscany. Lush rolling green hills, but every inch carefully cultivated by hand. The team at Mass were still graduate students at the time. But with Paul, Agnes, and many, many others, they asked, what if the hospital, the design of the building itself, could cultivate health? Not just a place for the provision of medicine, but a building that actively, through its design, cared for patients, doctors, staff, and families, and critically prevented indoor airborne disease. So the campus was designed with no indoor hallways. Uses were separated, every gathering space was outdoors but sheltered, with a thoughtful color palette for signage to create ample wayfinding. The wards were designed with simple passive strategies, equipped with big-ass fans to move the air. Patient beds were facing out towards the garden and nature. Beauty and greenery were seen, especially by Paul Farmer, as central to healing. We know it's been proven that the sight of a suffering patient, as wards are typically designed of patients looking at each other, can actually slow down recovery. But this simple act of flipping the beds in the wards to offer patients a view to nature makes a significant difference in their health and well-being. But the way we build it also mattered. We listened deeply. We used local materials and local skill. We created collaborative systems that employed hundreds of Rwandans. The Butaro Hospital, according to Paul, needed to be more than just a health facility. It had to be a symbol of a new beginning to prosperity. It's also where we developed our low fab philosophy, locally fabricated, investing in local materials and local craft. This volcanic rock is seen throughout the region, harvested out of fields for planting, but it had never been seen before as a sort of dignified building material. We worked with masons to invent a system of a mortarless system, revealing the beauty of this incredible stone, creating something unique at that time to the region, and sparking a thriving business for those masons today. This was Anne Marie, who led the team of masons at Butaro. Today, she leads a team of 40 working all across the country. In Butaro, we went on to design the region's first oncology center. Because patients traveled with their families for treatment, we created a kind of Ronald McDonald House for short-term stays. Next came housing for visiting doctors. And then with Paul Farmer and his growing team, we helped with the design and construction of the University of Global Health Equity on a hill across the valley. Together, these projects transformed Butaro. All of a sudden, in a place where there had been no access to medical services, there's a new global center for health equity and excellence. Learning how to distill these lessons into policy and how to take these lessons going forward, we were later hired by the government of Rwanda to develop a set of guidelines. They at first wanted sample hospitals, and we said, no, we're not going to do standard hospitals. It's not about rolling the same thing out, but we will do this set of guidelines to inform every new hospital that's built in the region. We ended up designing and building 2 prototypes, one rural, 180-bed hospital in Munini, which is about 4 hours south of the capital city of Kigali, and one right in downtown Kigali in a dense urban, wonderful neighborhood called Nyarugenge, also a 180-bed hospital, which immediately became the kind of hospital where COVID patients were treated because of the design of the hospital was already so well suited. So this was the launch of Mass Design Group in Africa. We understood that we could continue as architects down a conventional path of architecture, serving markets over people, reinforcing inequality, accelerating displacement, and fueling the cost of the climate crisis. Or we could build universities to help build African leadership. We could build centers for conservation excellence, accompanying communities to build capacity from the inside, using local knowledge, local resources, and local materials. Just last month, in July, I returned to this place in northern Rwanda for the memorial service of Dr. Paul Farmer. Our team worked with the University of Global Health Equity and with Paul's widow, Dee Dee Bertrand Farmer, to design a memorial glade, chapel, and mausoleum on that sacred hillside. Getting to know Paul was one of the honors of my life, and being able to understand a way to carry his work and the work of Partners in Health forward has been one of the greatest challenges. Sometimes at Mass we say that public health is to medicine what design and architecture should be to architecture. We're trying to create a model of architecture, like Paul created a model of health, that will accompany people along their lifetime journeys, not be someone you call when you need, an appointment at the doctor, or maybe you need a kitchen renovation, but rather an organization that can support communities over the long term. For me personally, I joined Mass because I didn't want to just design beautiful buildings, although of course, any building has to be beautiful. I wanted to help stitch together these stories that hold both grief and joy, stories that weave history with imagination, stories that help us see one another and shape a more just future. So we made the early decision to form ourselves as a nonprofit entity. You can see why I gave earlier to Clemson Architectural Foundation. We need to support those things that are really working on behalf of the greater good. Partners in Health had kind of given us that original model. How could we create an architecture and design firm that worked exclusively in service of the public good? Not as an organization that perhaps did a high-end hotel and then affordable housing, but just did the kind of housing that was affordable and meaningful to community members. An organization that could be rooted in listening, one that could hold memory, tell the truth, build trust, and one that doesn't just design for communities, but with them. To do that and to do work beyond what the market alone can support, we decided this nonprofit structure mattered. It lets us blend fee for service, which we do perform at about 70%, with philanthropic support so that we can partner with communities that are too often left out and say yes to projects that may not be profitable but are deeply meaningful. So today we're over 100 people, architects, landscape architects, engineers, planners, filmmakers, designers, storytellers. We use this hybrid model to try to go deeper, to stay longer, and to build lasting partnerships. Our work is organized into what we call design labs. Each lab focuses on a theme. We focus on issues like public memory, health and maternal health and newborn health, climate justice, indigenous communities. A lab allows us to do more than respond to a design brief. It allows us to prompt larger questions. What systems are we upholding? What histories are we carrying forward? What systems, what histories are we choosing to forget? What futures are we helping to shape? The labs allow us to go deeper, to stay longer, and again, invest in long-standing relationships that endure the test of time. And all of that is some of this context that led us to East New York. But still, in 25 years of talks, meetings, community gatherings, presentations to partners of all kinds, I've never seen the response DeMario had received last December in Brooklyn, a standing ovation for an architect presenting a design concept. 15 years since that 2010 Structures for Inclusion conference, I would say as a whole, we've made good progress. I hope that I can say that we're past debating whether architecture must serve the public good. I think we know that it must. I hope that we can all agree that there's no capital A architecture and a social architecture, that all architecture has to be both good and great, to quote my former president of the University of Virginia. There's only one architecture. It shapes all of us. Its impact is inseparable from the people, places, and systems that it touches. And yet, progress is fragile. The climate crisis is accelerating, rights are being rolled back, and justice is on the defensive. That night in Brooklyn, I felt something shift. What DeMario sparked was bigger than the meeting. It was a signal of what is possible when we practice differently. To understand that moment and the process that led to it offers us, I think, some critical insight. Because if we want to preserve the agency that we've gained to carry this work forward, we need to understand why it moved people. First, some background on Brooklyn Public Libraries. When I first learned in 2023 that we'd been invited to submit for a small RFP to design a new branch of the New Lodge Library, I was absolutely thrilled. I'd been following the work of Brooklyn Public Library for years. Their leadership understood what we believe at Mass, that design excellence is not a luxury. It's a form of essential respect, especially in communities that have faced disinvestment. They were elevating design standards to meet the needs and aspirations of the communities they serve all over Brooklyn. Brooklyn Public Library is also fighting back against censorship. Through bold programs like Books Unbanned, they've opened digital collections to young readers in states banning books. They've mailed books directly to students in Florida and Texas. And they've said clearly, libraries are not neutral. They are defenders of access, equality, and free expression. So joining New Lots wasn't just about the architecture. It was about entering a larger fight, a cultural, civic, and moral fight for belonging, for truth, and for their right to imagine better. Even before the project began, our friend and collaborator, Toshiko Mori, encouraged Brooklyn Public Library's president, Linda Johnson, to visit our project in Montgomery, Alabama, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which we designed with the Equal Justice Initiative. That memorial confronts the legacy of racial terror in America through space, memory, and design. A place of truth-telling, a place of grief, a place of reckoning, and a place of beauty. Linda and her team were moved by that experience, and they came back asking, what would it mean to create spaces in Brooklyn, spaces like libraries, that hold history, invite truth, and offer healing? That question became our North Star. New Lots is in the far reaches of Brooklyn. On my bike from the edge of Brooklyn, the Manhattan edge of Brooklyn, it takes me about 75 minutes to ride. Long before it was part of New York City, New Lots was farmland. Before that, it was Lenape land. And before that, a rich ecological system, salt marshes, forests, and rivers. Today, it's home to a vibrant, multi-generational communities, many Black and brown, many navigating systems that weren't built for them. The neighborhood has also endured decades of disinvestment, redlining, and neglect. And beneath it all, there are literally buried histories. The original library, built in the 1950s, sits atop an African burial ground, a sacred site covered by concrete and nearly erased. And yet, for nearly a century, that library has stood. It witnessed struggle, it has nurtured transformation, and it has held the stories of generations. So when we were invited to reimagine it, we knew this wasn't just another library. It was a chance to honor what came before, to listen deeply to the people of New Lots, and to build something that could serve generations to come.
Is a New Lots Avenue bound free train. The next and last stop is New Lots Avenue.
My favorite part about East New York is
the people,
the families, community,
mixing
Black culture, Caribbean culture,
thriving immigrant culture.
I love the resiliency, I love the vibrancy, I love the energy of East New York.
The history of this New Lots Library is incredible. This whole area here was controlled by the Dutch. They came in the early 1600s because they wanted to have new lots, which is why we have New Lots Avenue. That gravesite across the street, most of it is from our Dutch enslavers. Skank was a Dutch enslaver. Van Sicklen was an enslaver. East New York was built by Africans. Under this library was an African burial ground. That's why this library has to capture that.
We have to be able to tell these truths
and pass them on to the younger children so that they see that they are relevant, that they have power as well.
And the library can create that space where you learn about what happened, but also can be the forum to continue organizing.
And this library is going to be the center of a liberating cultural hub for the people of East New York.
It should be a beacon.
A social space. An incubator space.
A collective space.
A welcoming space.
A safe space. A historical place.
It should be an environment that invites someone
to help build a better, stronger East New York.
So let's see. So I'd like to go back again, building on the early work in Butaro to understand some of Mass's journey to how we got here, to see the foundation that DeMario stood on that day. So I'm going to get into a couple of case studies, 3 case studies. My first is Embrace Boston. My hometown of Boston has a proud history of revolution, but it also has a painful record of racial injustice. My colleague, Jadi Amazi, also grew up in Boston. She's an architect and a cultural force, a spoken word artist who uses rhythm and language to distill truth, ignite memory, and build community. Over a decade ago, she founded an open mic night centered on LGBTQ people of color. What began as a small gathering has become a beloved monthly tradition, a living monument to the power of voice. At Mass, Jadi leads our Public Memory and Memorials Lab, launched in partnership with the Equal Justice Initiative. The lab helps communities confront histories of violence and erasure and design spaces of justice and repair. The lab has brought together hundreds of people from across the world, each looking to center such a diverse array of untold stories and bring truth-telling into our physical world. Jadi brings her full self to this work, and this same ethos guides all of our design and engagement work. So the embrace. When the Boston Mayor's Office issued a call in 2017 for a new memorial on the Common to honor Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, Jadi and the lab stepped forward. Partnering with artist Hank Willis Thomas, the team led a multi-year process of listening, especially in Roxbury, the heart of Boston, shaping the memorial around the emotional power of a single photograph, Dr. King embracing Coretta after learning he'd won the Nobel Peace Prize. That embrace became the heart of the memorial, a 20-foot-high bronze sculpture abstracting their entwined arms. Beneath it, the 1965 Freedom Plaza honors 64 local civil rights leaders with inscriptions in quilt-like paving. But this wasn't just a monument. It became a movement in Boston. Public memory is under attack. Curricula are being sanitized. Monuments are weaponized. The public realm has become a battleground. Yet through memorials, museums, and landmarks and place names, we tell the story of ourselves, and these stories matter. I stood beside Ja on opening day as she addressed the crowd, holding back tears, standing with the King's great-granddaughter herself. Standing there, I thought of New Lots. Could a library hold this kind of memory? Could it help us navigate grief and joy? Could it become, like the Embrace, a site of deep community authorship and shared meaning? In Boston, Ja imagined memorialization not as a static remembrance, but as a platform for justice. Libraries, like memorials, can do that too. They are third spaces. They hold memory, and when rooted in community, they help us heal. At that same fateful 2010 Structures for Inclusion, when I met the early Mass founders, I also met Joseph Kunkel. Joseph is a citizen of the Northern Cheyenne Nation. Raised between New Jersey and Montana, he speaks often of the disparities he witnessed between those two homes and the responsibility that came with that. His path into architecture was shaped by his grandfather, who had built a school for his mother's tribe. Joseph later became a Rose Fellow, working with me and so many others, and was partnered with the Santo Domingo Housing Authority in the Kiowa Pueblo in New Mexico. There he led projects that honored community culture and created a new housing development, a heritage trail, a restored trading post. But more important than what was built was how it was built. In 2019, Joseph joined Mass through a merger with his organization, the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative. Today, he leads our Native Communities Design Lab, supporting tribal nations across the country in reclaiming space through design. In 2023, Joseph and his team supported the return of the sacred land to the Lipan Apache people in Presidio, Texas. It wasn't just a project, it was a ceremony. The site, once home to desecrated cemetery, was transformed through collaboration and reverence. Mesquite harvested from the land was used to construct a ceremonial pavilion. Paths were laid not to enclose, but to guide. A simple gesture, carrying a stone, became an act of memory. Now protected, the site is a living threshold, a place where story, sovereignty, and spirit converge. And again, I think of New Lots. What does it mean to return to a place that holds memory? What does it mean to design with reverence? From Presidio to Brooklyn, the answer is the same. Design can be a form of rematriation, a return to land, to story, to values. Case study 3 will return to Rwanda, one of the most densely populated rural countries in the world. It has emerged from this catastrophic violence with a bold public vision. On the last Saturday of each month, Rwandans take part in a community gathering day that they call Umuganda, a national day of service. Everyone returns back to their local neighborhood, community, and they work together to define what projects they'll take on month after month. They lay roads, they repair markets, they maintain schools. They do projects together that are for the benefit of the whole. In 2015, on a very dusty plot of land in the Bugesera district of Rwanda to the east of Kigali, our colleague Noella Nibakuze organized an Umuganda to help prepare for something new, the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, otherwise known as RICA. Noella grew up nearby. She knew the land and she knew the stakes. Rwanda faced urgent interconnected challenges: food insecurity, soil degradation, rural poverty. RICA set out to address them all, but it had to model something radically different. Working alongside around 90 designers, engineers, and thousands of Rwandan craftspeople, Noella helped shape this 3,400-acre regenerative campus. Dormitories are clustered to build community, walkways meander through orchards, shared meals are prepared with locally grown food. All of the materials, including the stone for foundations, the timber for roofs, and compressed earth, which make up every wall, either compressed or rammed earth, were sourced locally, designed for low carbon, and rooted in culture. We designed an entirely new line of furniture, working with 85 artisans from around the country to make different parts of the architecture process. When Noella and I walked the site together, I can really see what she helped create. Not just buildings, but systems, a sort of ecology of care. Acacia trees attracting insects that fed the formerly the gray-crowned crane, which had not been seen on the site recently, coming back to the site. Crops thriving along the restored wetlands. Today, RICA is on track to become the world's first climate-positive university. It runs on solar, treats all its water on site. We seeded over 250,000 native plants. Wildlife that was absent for decades has returned to this region. But maybe its greatest achievement is narrative. This was an architecture imposed from the outside. It was rooted, local, alive with dignity and pride. I think again of New Lots. Can a library do what RICA does? Teach through its design, layout, and planning. Could it become not just a place of learning, but a vessel of meaning? At RICA, we began to answer that question. In East New York, we asked it again. Those three projects, King Boston, RICA, and the Lipan Apache Cemetery, and those three people, Jadi, Noella, and Joseph, and the hundreds and thousands of other practitioners who have contributed to our collective work over the last 15 years, they all formed the foundation that Demario stepped into. It was a context built on an ambition to learn how to work differently. From Boston, we learned that memory is not fixed, it's made. That monuments, when rooted in community, can become movements. That truth-telling in public space can be an act of healing. From Texas, we learned that architecture can be an act of return, that land is sacred, and so is stewardship, that ceremony, not ego, should guide the design process. From Rwanda, we learned that architecture can be curriculum, that design can teach, restore ecosystems, and shift national narratives, that it is not a product, but a process of restoration. And when place, people, and purpose are aligned, we don't just build buildings, we build belonging. And from all of this, we've learned the simple but profound truth. Architecture is a team sport. It's always collective. It's always relational. At Mass, we don't ask, who is the lead designer? We ask, who are we listening to? Who is shaping this story? And how can we accompany them well? Because when a designer's story meets a community's story, something shifts. A building becomes more than a building. It becomes a vessel for meaning. At New Lots, DeMario had that kind of connection. He wasn't alone. From the beginning, the insight of our collective team made it clear. New Lots would require a unique process, as all of our projects do. We didn't arrive with a concept. We arrived with questions. Our goal was never to simply build a library. It was to build a story layered with memory, shaped by many hands and open to the future. You saw the film made by members of our narrative team, Calvin and Gabriel, who led months of immersive community engagement. They didn't just document, they became part of the fabric. They showed up at block parties, barbershops, elders' homes. Like Shadi, Noella, and Joseph before them, they became rooted in the neighborhood. They brought design tools into the parks, into community centers and block parties. And the community brought its full self, its truth, its histories, and its hopes. But at an early design meeting, DeMario shared that this project wasn't just professional for him. It was deeply personal. He said this wasn't a building only. It was a symbol of investment, of dignity, of belief. And then he told that story again publicly at the community meeting you saw at the start of his talk.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm DeMario Walker-Brown, a designer at Mass Design Group. I am excited and grateful to be in this space with you all today. I grew up in a predominantly Black community in Lexington, Kentucky. And as the first in my family to attend college and earn a master's degree, I owe much of that success to the use of a community center and a public library that were very close to me back home. These resources gave me the tools to learn, grow, and plan my future, shaping my commitment to which I believe are the essential tools for empowering individuals and communities. We feel this project is an opportunity to reframe the site and to provide space and opportunity for community gathering. And now, the moment that we've all been waiting for is the actual design of the project.
When DeMario stood before the community, he held the room really in his hand. You could have heard a pin drop. He didn't just present a design. He offered a story of himself. By sharing his story of self, he created a story of us and a story of now. In doing so, he dissolved the boundary between designer and community. He helped build what we always hoped to create, an ecosystem of trust. In that moment, the stakes became clear. The design became shared. The library, still unbuilt today, became real. And everyone in the room stood to applause, not because of the floor plan, which is beautiful, but because I think they felt seen. And this is what we mean by design leadership. This is what it means to accompany. But why does this matter? Because every project faces pressure, budget cuts, value engineering, political cycles. But here, the Brooklyn Public Library and the constituents of New Lots have fought to uphold the integrity of the design. They've become remarkable clients, deeply invested. And part of what made that possible is how DeMario and the team made that care legible in built form. They showed how through design, how decisions signal dignity, how materials, layout, and light can say, you matter. That moment from DeMario became a story of now, not just for New Lots, but for all of us doing that work, and for me too. I entered architecture to address questions around the homelessness that I had seen around me as a child. But over time, in helping others make home, I've come to understand what home means in my own life. Storytelling is not separate from design. It's what gives it meaning. Story moves hearts, design that gives movement form. Because the goal isn't the building, actually. It's connection, dignity, the right to be seen, and to shape the spaces we call home. Watching DeMario that day, so rooted, so respectful, stand before the people of New Lots, I saw not just the future of this project, but what I think is the future of this field. Not just the buildings we are creating, but the way we are creating it. And I felt something rare in architecture, a sort of sense of arrival, because this is the work, and this is the way. That moment from DeMario becomes a story of now, not just for New Lots, but for all of us. In all the talks, meetings, community presentations I've been part of, I've just never seen anything quite like that. It's not applause for a person making a performance. It's an applause for an us stepping out boldly into a new reality. Since that conference in 2010, when I first encountered Mass, we've moved so far. And yet, I think the next step is for each of us to learn to kind of embody this commitment to our own story of self, not to present our egos or to overtake or think in some ways that the design of a project is the design done by one, but to be able to bring our authentic selves as authentic collaborators with each other in the design field, and most importantly, with the communities we serve. In DeMario's model, I see a model of design leadership that we carry across Mass. It isn't about charisma or control. Each of our team invests in understanding their own story. It's about presence, the ability to listen deeply, honor lived experience as expertise, and create the conditions for others to lead. At Mass, we don't start with drawings. We start with story, because story is where the truth lives, where grief is named, where joy becomes visible. And when we build trust and invite community into the center, we don't just get better buildings. We get buildings that build us back. So how does this story end? Well, it doesn't. New Lots isn't an ending. It's just a beginning. Architecture is never neutral. Every decision about material, layout, lighting, access, it's all symbolic. A story about who belongs, a prototype, a patch stitched into a larger quilt of justice-centered design. And so this is where you come in, because the stories that will be told next, the systems that will be built, the futures that will be imagined, will be shaped by you. In a world building walls, literal and ideological, your job will be to build bridges, to stitch together memory and imagination, grief and hope, people and place. At Mass, we know that architecture isn't just about structures. It's about systems, culture, and power. It's about who gets to shape the future and whose story we carry forward. And it begins every time with a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now. Thank you. Awesome. How'd we do on time? Thanks to the technical team.
Thank you, Katie. We're going to take some time for some questions and answers. We're going to start with student questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand.
Questions? Raise them high so I can see you.
Thank you.
I loved your whole talk and everything. And how would you advise students to take some of the principles you shared with us today into their own studio projects and also outside of the classroom?
Yeah, thanks for that critical question. You know, I had lunch with Barron today, and we were talking about how important writing is to the design process, and kind of came together over an idea that writing is to thinking as drawing is to designing, meaning you don't really know what you think until you write it down. And so I think part of it is investing in your own capacity to build a sense of self-awareness and understand kind of your commitments and biases. Sometimes I think that when we put on our hat that we're the architect, we pretend that we don't bring our full selves, but we do, whether we know it or not. So I think that process of, in any project, no matter what it is, being able to kind of dig into ideas about, like, what does this project mean to you? And, you know, I like to teach at Parsons and at Columbia. We talk a lot about teaching narrative in studio and being able to learn how to kind of form a story around your project that uses a kind of methodology around identifying the story of self, which ideally helps build trust with your folks. Like, why do you care? A story of us then connects people. Why do we care? And the story of now becomes kind of your design proposal. Like, so what should we do about it? So I would highly recommend making sure we get so obsessed with, like, the making and the drawing and the models. Sometimes we forget the role of the narrative until, like, the end of the project and you're scribbling your notes down. Build it into your process is one of my recommendations. Build it in early, because there's no one story of self. It depends on the context, and you'll evolve. But understanding how to connect that, I think, is a very, very useful tool. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please. I guess you're going to have to tell us your name and where you are in your studies.
So my name is Eric Johnson. I'm a third-year grad student here. I guess the question I have is, especially the project Vitaro, love the use of all the stone, but here in the States, obviously, we have very strict, not necessarily strict building codes, but utilizing a local material like that poses its own challenges. And I guess, how do you, in the practice, overcome that, where you want to produce some novel means of architecture that's not been seen before, yet we also have code officials that really don't like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, because our work got started primarily in East Africa, it's a context, such an interesting place to learn how to be an architect or an engineer. When we were building RICA, for example, we had a team of 22 engineers on our staff, because you can't really spec things. You have to make them. So it's not just sort of doing the calculations and speccing something. You have to test, iterate, make sure that the thing that you're using is meeting the design specifications that you set up, but to do that on site and always monitor it. So it gets you in a very sort of different mindset around materials and the role of the architect. Our work in the US, I guess I probably didn't show enough of it today, but interestingly, has been kind of on fire lately. In the last few years, after the Memorial for Peace and Justice was kind of our first breakout project, we have a lot of work in the US. So we're constantly trying to ask these questions. And it is different. There's no doubt about it. The question is, like, where do you seek innovation? what do you push back against? What materials will you accept and what conventions do you need to accept? Baron and I were talking about the beauty and the curse of passive house today at lunch, how building codes for affordable housing in Massachusetts insist on passive house now. But our team has a lot of issue with the kind of carbon count and other health questions around building such a tight envelope. So I would say yes, the issues in the US are totally different, but a design process around seeking out kind of innovation and design, there's no one stop for design. So the innovation can come, I hope, from so many different places. I feel like the New Lots Library is going to be a really beautiful, spectacular project. But yes, it will. We've been choosing the materials incredibly carefully, but we're not making them in the same way. And we can't sort of have that degree of innovation in that same way. But here's where the rubber meets the road. That facade on New Lots, you see those kind of the woven sort of grill. You can imagine the value engineering that a public agency like the Brooklyn Public Library is going to want to do. But what's been so fascinating is understanding the tenacity of the extended group to fight for the highest and best materials. Because I think they so bought into the idea that that material choice was so critically important to the larger goals of the project around issues of dignity and other things. So hopefully as a designer, listen, the challenges from 20 years ago are different than the challenges of today, but we still have so much room to innovate. So I hope we keep the spirit of that kind of innovation. It can't always be new. It can't always be, you don't have all of those kind of breakthrough moments. But I hope that we try to continue to bring that into our design practice here in the US. Yeah, thank you. Yes, please, in the back.
Hey, my name's Joel Adams. I'm a first-year Master of Landscape Architecture student. Awesome. And one of my buddies once said there's a sacred expression of every skill set. And I had never seen a model for how to use the design skill set in the way that y'all are doing, like in terms of splitting the funding for the projects 70-30 the way you did. And really, first of all, thank you for showing all of this. But second, do y'all have any kind of place where people can learn about the structure of how Mass operates, like as a business?
Yeah, the structure of Mass is definitely, it has been kind of part of our secret sauce. And I might have thought, we incorporated in 2010, and I might have thought we'd have more copycats by now, because of course that's when you know you're really succeeding. But we remain, I would say, a little bit of an anomaly still. So hopefully I'd like to see people take our model, improve upon it. But so as structuring as a nonprofit, but the nonprofit design centers that I know typically might be within a university, like I used to run the Charlottesville Community Design Center. We were not associated with UVA, but we had a bit of a relationship with them. Groups like the Gulf Coast Community Design Center that's associated with University of Mississippi. You all might have one, and forgive me if I'm unaware. And other design nonprofits might be advocacy agencies, like I'm a board member of the Van Allen Institute in New York, which leverages designers to work with communities. But a design firm that's a nonprofit is kind of a different model. So we set up that way because what we knew was that inherent in a design fee is a scope that is simply too limited to do what we wanted to do. So typically in architecture, sadly in architecture, the majority of the design fee is between design and construction. But the clients that we work with, and almost any client, actually needs pre-design way upstream to be able to organize themselves and set kind of bigger intentions and get a kind of group that they need to fuel the project over the long term. So they need a lot of pre-design. And then if it's up to us, they would have a lot of post-design, including a kind of impact measurement. In architecture, we rarely actually talk about impact. We talk about intention, but we don't always talk about impact. So we wanted to say, okay, the design and construction part, we can typically get paid for as a normal architect, but we want to be able to do more on either side. So it's impossible almost to recoup that. And because we're working with nonprofits, it's not necessarily like, oh, there's so much profit from that design and architecture segment that we can just invest our profits in the other work. So we have been leveraging philanthropy. It's not easy. There are not many design firms that are seeking philanthropy. Philanthropists don't always understand us. So we're trying to convince them or to bring them into this notion that investing in the design process can have these tangible impacts in communities that not investing in it wouldn't have, right? So if you're building, if you're just investing in that, like design construction, what kind of building are you gonna get? What kind of longer term impact? But it's always a huge question. I just had a group of folks from the Harvard Advanced Leadership Institute in Rwanda, and they're all mid-career, established, very accomplished people. And the conversation started happening. One of them worked on school design, and his question was, well, geez, I need to build so many schools. Should I build 100 schools? You know, for the same amount of money, I could build, I don't know, 50 schools. Or like, do I invest in the number of schools built without too much attention to how they're designed and frankly, how they perform and how they meet student needs and educational outcomes? Or do I try to invest in the system that says, in order to achieve a learning outcome, the kind of outcomes that you want from a school, you need to invest in the physical environment of that school in the following way. So these are questions that are alive and well all the time. But for us, we've decided that bringing in a kind of philanthropy that might either support our ability to work with partners who couldn't work with us, to work on the stages of projects that wouldn't be funded otherwise, has been an essential need to be able to do the kind of architecture that we think is going to have that sort of lasting value. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Jackson Copeland. I'm in my final semester of my undergrad at Clemson. I was very inspired by the ways you were talking about your firm connecting with the different communities throughout your various projects. As we're in the first week of our classes, I think a lot of us can relate to either just being assigned a studio project or a community or somewhere where we'll be visiting a site in the next couple of weeks. My question is, what advice would you give for students who maybe only have 1 or 2 days with these communities in order to craft that narrative that you were talking about earlier? And if it is only 1 day in the community, what types of questions can we be asking that are the most helpful? And even past visiting that community, what research should we be doing to really impact our narrative?
Gosh, that is a great question. Of course, it's so important to travel and to get out of the studio and engage with communities, but as you know, it doesn't necessarily go well. And also, the community members are giving you their time. And the question really is, what are you giving them back in return? So at Columbia, in the Masters of Urban Design program, we teach a class called Community Change and go out into communities to do the kind of work that you do. So what we've tried to do to make that effective is we start the semester, actually I'm doing it next weekend on Friday and Saturday, we start with this story of self narrative. We build the self as now narrative. So last semester, for example, our studio was in kind of coal country, Steelers country, we ended up calling it, in Western Pennsylvania. And these are communities that have, suffered disinvestment after the coal industry kind of dried up, and people like grandparents sometimes are there, and young people have gone to the city, and they have population decline. So in that studio, we had about 50 students from really all over the world. But we started to ask, how do you connect to this issue? And what I found was that students who were perhaps from, I had students from China, from India, from Korea, all over the world, where actually their families had experienced that kind of displacement. And we worked on this kind of narrative approach so that when you go into a community, you don't just say, I'm here as the expert, and you are my experiment. But rather you can go into the community and you can say, here's who I am. I had students saying, and we'd work on some storytelling too. So one of my students told this story. Said, when I was 5 years old, one day I was sitting at lunch with my grandmother, which was normal, and my mom came home for lunch. And at the time, I was so overjoyed that my mom was home for lunch because it was so weird. But I also felt a sense of discomfort. Like, why was she home? 2 weeks later, his parents and he packed up and left. His mom had been laid off from her factory job, and they moved to the city, and they would only ever return to see his grandmother once a year on vacation. So this student was able, with a name that was hard to pronounce, from a province in China that nobody had heard of, was able to share this experience and as by way of introduction, and sort of say, so I'm here to learn about your experience and to talk with you about how we could work together to develop some shared strategies for your community. Now, that also entails, before we went, we had Zoom calls. The students did what we call their desk research. I'm not sure your terminology here, but you make sure your desk research is as deep as possible. But try to make contact before, and then what I would heartily recommend is to make contact after. Share. So, people love to talk about themselves, and the idea that someone's coming to work on an issue that they care about can be deeply gratifying, as long as they feel like they're partners with you. If they feel like they're your experiment, not so much. And that can happen. So think about showing up in a way where you're not the expert architect, but you're a person. And bring your personhood and why you care into the conversation and try to meet them in that place. Yeah, thanks for that question.
So we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There's one over here.
So quiet. Woohoo! First day.
Thank you so much for your talk. My name is Mahnur. I'm a third-year undergrad. And I just wanted to know, when you're taking on these projects that have such important cultural and historic ties, how do you do that in a way that you're still respecting all that while creating something new and focusing on like what you want to take from that?
So in contexts where there's such important history, how do we work to ensure that that history is told well, respected? Yeah, I think we rely on our partners, right? So we're not the ones necessarily telling the history. Ideally, our partners are the ones telling the history, and we're giving them the tools to do it to the best of their ability. So we have tools like research. Architects and landscape architects and historic preservation, excellent researchers, right? We want to go in and kind of understand all the systems. So we can do that level of research. We can bring the visualization tools to that research. I've been able to participate in engagements where we're able to sort of re-present a history to a group who is the expert on that history, but because of the way that it's shown, they see it differently themselves, and they find a way to be able to. But of course, if something's wrong in there, you go back and correct it. So I think, you know, there's always an element of, it's not just listening, right? Like, design is also an act of staking a claim of a future, right? That is unseen and unknown. And if a community could do that on their own, they wouldn't need architects and landscape architects to do it for them. So how do you balance the way to be like respectful and engaged, but also bring the joy, the delight, the vision, the forward thinking? And you have to be bold and maybe also have a bit of a thick skin and try your best to do it well, but to know that you're not always going to get it right. There's almost no time, you know, there's always like, even at the Brooklyn Public Library, like, you know, in the beginning we present, you know, 3 schemes. There's always the like 3 schemes. You know, you kind of have your favorite and you're like desperately hoping your favorite will be their favorite. But you rarely in that kind of engagement present one, although let's say with the Embrace, that was a competition. So we had to put out a scheme. There were 126 entries. They narrowed it down to 5. We became part of the 5. We were not designated as the people's choice, but yeah, in that case, we had 1. And, you know, not everybody loved the Embrace on day 1. There was like a whole Twitter storm about it. Now people really love it. It's like become a real gathering spot in the Boston landscape. But sometimes you get burned. But so I hope in all of this, that combination of, I guess there's a humility, and there's also has to be like a joy to design. Design and designers are just fundamentally optimistic people. Y'all are trying to envision a future which does not exist now. Like, it's big what you do. And it can be scary to see into the future or to imagine into a future. So it takes, you know, the ability to be courageous and be brave. But I think that's also why, you know, for me, like when I met someone like, let's say like Paul Farmer, who was so grounded in his core values, or I talked about being a student with the Journal and meeting Sambo Mockbee, who was so grounded in his values. Those people didn't come by that groundedness just accidentally. Like, they worked at it, and you can too. So I think, I kind of imagine sometimes like, if you imagine like a rubber band, and the top end is like your aspiration and your design, and the bottom end is like your reality and your sense of self. Well, in a rubber band, what produces energy is the tension between those two. But if the aspiration is slack, you lose the tension. If that sense of grounded reality is not attended to, or you don't really know who you are or what you care about, then that's slack. So both sides need to engage to be able to be, I think, the kind of designer that you want to be. So yes, attending, listening, getting your own ducks in order, asking yourself the hard questions, listening to community, committing to that, but also striving for like an ambition to make the world a better place than you found it, to equip communities with the ability to do the same, whoever you're working for, and to hold tension between those things. Like, that's what gives you the heat, the passion, the motivation to be able to move things forward, is inherent in that kind of tension. Yeah, so when in doubt, think of that rubber band. Yeah, do we have time for one more?
One more question?
Baron, you want one? Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.